Hello everyone. Tonight I will be giving a summary on Chapter 11 of B.F. Skinner's About Behaviorism. So the beginning of the chapter starts with an introduction, and Skinner starts the chapter off describing that in the behavioral analyst world, a person is an organism that has behavioral repertoire. As an individual, we are unique because we all have our own genetic endowment, personality, and no one can share our own personal history. So therefore, we are able to behave precisely in our own way, and we do not behave in the same way as others. So it goes into the subheading of knowing oneself, and it starts out by saying who can know about whom. Skinner continues by describing self-knowledge and how it stems from a social origin. He states that a person acquires self-knowledge based on their environments and communities contribute to how people describe themselves, to themselves, and to others. So for instance, communities can either make introverted or extroverted people, and people can be considered careless or actually be responsible, based off these communities. We explore our feelings, we tend to have a better understanding of our being at the time. So from this self-knowledge, we gain insight on ourselves. When conditions change, we tend to act differently. And we use sayings such as, I wasn't acting like myself, or I wasn't being myself. And I know we've all had those instances in life where we're just like, the contingencies or our environment is just out of the blue and just not normal. And we act a certain way that we usually don't act. And that's what he's saying. We gain insight on ourselves from this, and when conditions change, we tend to act differently and use those sayings. Skinner continues on by discussing that at times we are not aware of the contingencies we're exposed to. So if someone asks why we do or act the type of way that we act, we often give circular reasoning such as, that's just who I am, or that's just how I was born. He continues on by describing how in order for a person to understand someone else, we must first take the time to understand how that person is feeling or what he's thinking. And that also gives us insights on why they act the way they do. Skinner says we use the expression of feeling to indicate how one may feel, but we cannot project feeling onto other people. So for instance, he gave a example on someone committing a brave act. So someone can commit a brave act and it may seem brave in one person's eyes, but in all naturality, that person was scared for their life and had probably exhibited emotions of fear. So we can't really project those false expressions on anyone when we don't know. We can also reveal how someone really feels if we alter contingencies. And as people, we find it easier to understand how one is feeling when they communicate their feelings. Furthermore, we tend to see how people feel because our behavior can be reinforced by it. And if their feeling is absent, we tend to dig in deeper to understand why or how they feel the way they do. So we go into the subheading of managing oneself, and it starts out by asking who are the managing and the managed self. Basically, Skinner goes in to say that they're repertoires of our behavior, which is managing and the managed self, are just repertoires of our behavior. Managed self can be described as selfish behavior, and the managing self focuses on social environment. It goes off into saying it's selfish reasoning for a person to alter their behavior that's more reinforcing to others. And with self-management, it's considered to be manipulations of feelings and a state of mind. It also garnishes techniques in which we use that bring our history into play when faced with an aversive setting, such as drinking alcohol. We're enforced by drinking, but drinking too much can result in a punishment, which would be a hangover. Therefore, having a rule of not drinking too much is a form of self-management. Skinner also continues on by reiterating that the goal of self-management is referred to as self-fulfillment, which is also, another term for achievement, and behavior resulting from self-management is effective. So the next subheading goes into managing another person, and I thought that this subheading was very interesting. Skinner starts out by saying one person manages another in the sense in which he manages himself. He continues on by saying a person can change the behavior of someone else by changing the environment which they're in, and we use operant conditioning in managing others because we arrange positive and negative contingencies to provide encouragement, to create interest, to instill purposes, and raise awareness in other people. It goes into another subheading, which goes into describing contingencies, and in summary, it talks about how we don't arrange contingencies, we just follow the contingency shape and the rule base governed behind it. We use consequences that can persuade a person to act a certain way, and we give warnings for people to behave rationally, as there has been contingencies where a person has learned to now act more appropriately. It also goes into emotional and motivational measures, and Skinner discusses how if a person wants to do and go is if a person wants to go and is reinforced by it, the contingency is now placed to always wanting to do good or be good by that person. We could satiate a person by reinforcing the good, even when it's not in relation to the contingency. And we could also place a person in disposition by withholding the reinforcement, causing previously reinforced behaviors to arise. And I thought of this as like an extension burst. The second subheading in this chapter goes into teaching, and Skinner describes teaching as a teacher placing contingencies on students that they will understand and be able to use for future contingencies. And then he talks about helping, and he basically says, let's be real and let's be realistic. By reinforcing behavior with responses such as affection, approval, and attention can only cause further problems due to the fact that reinforcement isn't natural. Instead, one can help a person by arranging an environment that exerts control. And from that, I basically took from that personally that when we look for the praise and we look for the love and the affection and the things that is reinforcing to us, it's all good in that moment, but let's be realistic, it's not as natural. So it's just, instead we can set up these instances where we can help people and arrange this environment that exerts control instead of just exerting control all the time. He goes into governing, which is also managing in his terms, and we tend to hold people accountable by maintaining these contingencies because these contingencies have affected them in some way. And also entertaining can be described as people are constantly reinforced even without contingencies in place. So from all this, those are all the subheadings that describe how one can manage another person. So in conclusion, Skinner reiterates that self-knowledge is a matter of being in contact with oneself. And once a person tries to understand why they behave the way they do, a different kind of self-knowledge is established. But this can be reversed by self-management due to the fact that people do learn how to control others. That's the end of my summary of the chapter, and I must say that this one was filled with a lot of knowledge and a lot of information that I had to go back and reread. But once I reread it and was able to comprehend it, it made a lot more sense, because personally Skinner can be a bit confusing, but if you go back and read it again, it all makes sense in a weird behavioral analyst type of way. So my discussion question derives from this quote that I found in this chapter, which is, self-management is represented as the direct manipulation of feelings and state of mind. So my question to you all is, what contingencies, environments, or circumstances help frame your current self-management? Describe and provide examples. So I base my answer off this question is how I was raised. I came from a strong background where it's family oriented and love first. And basically my state of mind or my self-management is to always love yourself first. And I always carry that with me in everything that I do. If it's not applied to me, or if it does not make me happy, then it's not fit for me. And I have a lot of other examples for this question that I will post in our discussion, but that was the first one that hit me, and that's why I felt that this question was so important. So I want to know, what type of contingencies or environments help frame the self-management for you? Thank you for listening to my summary, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation, and I can't wait to read and see all your discussion answers. Thank you and have a great night.